Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are very happy to begin with the series of special lectures on behalf of Indialics. On behalf of Indialics and on my own behalf, I welcome you all in this lecture where Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is expected to deliver this lecture during the next half an hour. It is a great pleasure to welcome to Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, and this lecture is expected to be chaired by my great friend Professor KJ Joseph, who is the president of the Globalics. And I welcome you all, and I hope you will enjoy this particular lecture. I would like to just begin with saying that this is a difficult time, both in terms of the kind of infectious disease we all are witnessing, and the recessionist tendencies which are set in. So both are difficult for the economy as well as for the society as a whole. There are a lot of thinking which is going on in terms of looking into why we have got this pandemic, as well as why we are deep in a recessionary phase. And you will find that a large number of economists, social scientists, political scientists are looking in terms of the kind of alternative ideas where you'll find that the future world, in the post-COVID world, we will be much better manage ourselves. But look, for example, in terms of the problems which we have inherited and perhaps are expected to be perpetuated, the problem of access to technology is highly unequal, and the economic outcomes which are coming out are highly inequitable. And you'll find that this COVID has generated a lot of inequity because the labor is almost not able to make the wage which they are expected to make wage income. And you will find that it is expected a large number of people are expected to shift below the poverty line, and this situation is expected to be very serious for large proportion of the population which was already vulnerable. And you will find that poor and vulnerable population is now going to slip to the poverty. And especially in India, we have experimenting with a different kind of policy setup, which is more biased towards the monopolistic kind of practices, and you will find that inequity is expected to be built in that. Today, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is going to deal with all these kind of problems, and I would not like to keep on talking and would like to say that welcome you all, and I thank especially Professor Chaturvedi, who has given us time, as well as you'll find that found out a very important topic to speak on. So I would like to request now Professor KJ Joseph to formally introduce Professor Sachin Chaturvedi to the audience. Although I know that a large number of people may be knowing him, but there are few new faces, so they will benefit out of the introduction. And will request Professor KJ Joseph to kindly take charge of the conduct of the proceedings of this lecture. Thank you very much, KJ.
Thank you, Professor Lakwinder Singh. Good afternoon to all of you. We are going to have the first public lecture that we are planning to organize under Globalics, under the Indialics activities. Last month, we were fortunate to have the inauguration of the Indialics activities, wherein we had a conversation with Bender K. Lundwal, the founder of Globalix. And thereafter, we were reflecting about, as we already informed you, who should be delivering the opening public lecture of Indialics. So I talked to many of them, many of our friends who are actively involved in driving Indialics. There was no difference of opinion, saying that, okay, why don't we ask Sachin? So when I approached him, he was very hesitant for reasons which are obvious. When I introduce him, you will realize that he is burdened with so many responsibilities today. And in the midst of that, maybe we finally agreed to deliver this. And Professor Lakwinder and myself, though in the pandemic time, we are also fairly busy, because we were thinking of sending you the invitation 2 weeks ago, and search for a moderator and a few discussions, which I must accept that we failed to do that. And one thing which we assure you, that next lecture onwards, there will be a moderator, a proper moderator, not KJ, and a few discussants, designated discussants. So first of all, I'm extremely thankful to Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General of RIS, for kindly agreeing to deliver the opening public lecture series of Indialics. And I must also suggest that the topic that he has selected for reflecting today, the STI ecosystem and endogeneity of technology, the role of access, equity, and inclusion and governance in Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think, I don't need to elaborate on the relevance of this topic, because we have been, for the last at least 2 decades, one decade at least, we have been, the developing world, our whole world across, has been convinced of the fact that while globalization has enabled us to produce high growth rates, that prosperity that was coming out of that high growth was not equitably distributed. That has been raising concerns of inclusion, access, and inequality. And in fact, our journal, Innovation and Development, was perhaps the most a forum wherein this issue was discussed at length. 3 special issues were brought out on this. And in the Indian context, we know that while we have given what is called self-reliance, the prime of place at the time of development planning, over time, that became the most maligned term, and comparative advantage and the international competitiveness, etc., replace these terms. And today, with Atmanirbhar, in fact, thanks to COVID, the importance of self-reliance is reiterated. I think in that sense of the term, Atmanirbhar is actually a very timely initiative. And Sachin's attempt to reflect upon these 2 sets of issues, I don't think that we could not have taken a better topic for reflection today at the time of COVID and the new initiatives. I congratulate him for this particular point issue for taking for discussion. As I'm not going to extend, maybe one more minute maximum. For this audience, Sachin doesn't need an introduction. But from the formality of it. I must say that for me and he, I must say that he must be meaning different people to different for different people. To me, I mean, I was very happy, lucky that I was his colleague for almost 2 years in the early 2000s. And to my mind, he is an excellent scholar and a wonderful human being. And above all, and if I must say that an impeccable administrator, and he has taken RIS to the heights that unexpected, I must say. And he earlier the positions that he held included he was the Global Justice Fellow at the Macmillan Center of International Affairs at Yale University. Then he has associated with a number of institutions of repute globally, like Institute of Development Studies, and there is hardly any international agency with which Sachin has not been associated with, that include WTO, UNESCAP, UNESCO, OECD, Commonwealth Secretariat, IUCN, etc. And in the fear, I mean, you must be knowing that he was the founding editor of Asian Biotechnology Review, one of the pioneering publications from Asia on this topic, and now he is the editor-in-chief of South Asia Economic Journal. His area of interest is, I must say, quite wide in terms of starting from traditional knowledge to trade and technology to innovation, and in fact, in the sphere of South-South cooperation and other related issues, he has made, in fact, path-breaking contributions, and he's worked with along with the Thomas Fuss and all widely cited. So I don't want to, I mean, and again, he is at a very young age. I think he must be the youngest of the Reserve Bank of the board of governors of Reserve Bank, and now he's also the chairman of NISTADS, so on and so forth. And I must say that these are all, despite all these accomplishments and busy schedule, he has agreed to kind of come and be with us. First of all, I once again most warmly welcome Professor Sajjan Chaturvedi to our crowd, and on behalf of all of you, I invite him to deliver his lecture. I think he deserves a big hand at this juncture. Unfortunately, we are all in a position in different locations. Sachin, please accept a big applause, welcoming applause on our behalf to you. And as far as the rules of the game, which is very common, I think Professor Sachin might take maybe 40 minutes or something like that. After that, it will be open to discussion, and feel free to raise your hand and come up with questions, and we might conclude it, say, by around 5:20 or so. Fine. Thank you very much, and welcome you. Over to you, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, to deliver the first public lecture of Indialics.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, KJ. And at the outset, I must congratulate Indialics for initiating this extremely important modality of engaging with the researchers and with the larger community engaged in the conversations, discussions on innovation and adoption, diffusion of technology. I am extremely privileged to have Professor KJ Joseph, the Globalics president, and of course, both Professor Lakhvinder Singh Gill and Professor KJ Joseph have shaped the narrative within which the researchers, the policymakers are engaged in terms of the wider dialogues on how India specific or Southern specific innovation system can come up. And I'm very glad that today I'm not only seeing researchers like Dinesh Abrol and Professor Ajad and others in this group, but I'm also seeing Dr. Vashne from DST and our other colleagues who are also very intensely engaged in these discussions and seminars. So I think it's a wonderful effort, and I must congratulate both Professor Gill and Professor KJ Joseph for their efforts. As KJ very rightly mentioned, innovation and development as a journal has emerged in last few years as one important contribution from the South, not just from India, but from the South, to provide platform to researchers and commentators on innovation system. So far, it was largely an area where we used to see commentators from Europe and other OECD countries. But with innovation and development, we have got a journal which can bring in southern perspective, southern variables that are of key significance in understanding innovation. I think it's a fascinating development. I must congratulate KJ for that. Friends, today, with whatever time I have with me, I would be covering a large canvas in terms of the triggers that are of key significance for us to factor in when we are talking about science, technology, innovation, the distributive part of it, but also the current triggers in terms of self-reliance. And I think these three dimensions are likely to be sort of readdressed, recontextualized when we talk of governance. And I would bring in that factor more from the point of view of how new technologies are to be addressed. As Professor Gill very rightly mentioned at the outset, we are in very difficult times with COVID. The world is grappling with this pandemic. There are several challenges that are associated with it, but it has also exposed thoroughly the fragility of global interlinkages, and that I think is important for us to take note of, because the global interdependence that is there is facing challenges in terms of the rise of the nationalism, which is in a way creating major challenges on how countries engage with each other. In what way we see the dimensions of this engagement. If US is asserting its technological developments in the realm of health sector, EU is very keen to protect the digital sector from US and China's rise. China is very keen to assert in the financial sector with its private companies, but also with the promotion of crypto and other digital currencies, where China is very keen to have the currency swap arrangements that it is propagating for last almost 7 to 8 years in a major way to be backed by technology. And that change is now evident through several central banks of Africa, which are facing that heat. So if you look at the global scenario, and by the way, none of these countries, neither US nor EU or China, they are prepared for global standards on technology governance. And as a result, we are ending up in a situation where the borders for science are no more open. This is particularly when, as Professor Gill very rightly said, in pandemic times, we need greater cooperation. We need rich mutual recognition agreements. We need very robust and profound material transfer agreements. We need regulatory architectures which are, if not harmonized, at least are compatible with each other, where supervisory rules of the multilateral institutions are there. But we are seeing them that they're being weakened. And this has obvious imperatives for industrial R&D. Friends, in today's talk, I would have 5 broad sections in my talk. The first, as I said, would cover the COVID experience. What kind of insights are coming out from technology perspective? The second section would talk about the theoretical framework that explains the idea of endogeneity. The third section would talk about the challenges India may face on her path for self-reliance, or Atmanirbhar Bharat as it's called. And the fourth section would talk about the idea of the AEI framework, the Access, Equity, Inclusion framework, which we have been working on, and then the way forward. So let me begin with the first section, where the COVID experience is coming in, and that is throwing up some very important insights. As we are seeing, the pandemic has brought to us many new sort of experiences with technology. strengths in the leveraging of digital technologies. For instance, we all have seen the growing usage of Arogya Setu, which is an important development in terms of managing and also sharing of information. But apart from creating awareness and quick dissemination of desired details, the issues are also important in terms of how the transaction costs can be reduced, how we can bring down the leakages, and of course, those who are expecting it in terms of the benefits of various welfare measures that we can bring in. This could become possible through some dedicated efforts for open digital ecosystems, and that ODE, I think, is something that not only COVID but other parallel developments that have been going on that has thrown up. And I think this is one important dimension for us to see. Just this Sunday, I saw an important interview with Rupa Kudwa, who suggested that there are some 10 such ODEs which may come up in next few years, getting us an advantage of up to $500 billion. And at this point, around 532 billion are being transferred to 420 million people through schemes like Jan Dhan, PM Kisan, and PM Ujjwala. And that overarching framework through Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana is something that is targeting to reach out to around 800 million people. So when we are getting onto that track, the issues that are related to privacy, data protection, anonymization of data are all likely to be very much on the table, and we are likely to discuss them. The proposed data protection bill is trying to address some of that and MeitY, the Ministry of Electronics and IT of the Government of India, is trying to develop some of those institutional backup mechanisms that are important. As you might have noticed, the launch of the digital locker within the Digital India, connecting it with Aadhaar, etc., is providing a huge sort of institutional backup that is needed. At this point, if you see, around 3.3 crore people are using DigiLockers. The recent announcement by the Prime Minister of the Digital Health Mission is another important dimension. I see now that in Habitat Center itself, our neighbor institution and the National Institute for Urban Affairs has launched what is called as NUIS, the National Urban Innovation Stack. And that is trying to bring in the Urban Data Exchange, India Urban Connect, Smart Procure, Research and Innovation, Urban India, National Urban Learning Platform, all of them into one place. And this is likely to be developed not only for health or urban affairs, but also for agriculture. And this, I think, is important. It is not only within India, but with other fellow developing countries that we can also think of. COVID-19 crisis, as we are realizing, has given us more opportunity to come together, and importantly with the alacrity that it requires. It also needs some sort of critical support on technologies, the mode of thinking that is needed, and that if has to be translated into practice, it requires a sort of community participation, it requires governance, and it requires all the actors to come together. So with that backdrop, let me get into the issues that are related to indigeneity. So broadly, what we are seeing is that the information technology, the targeted attempts, the dissemination of it, they are providing the rich sort of bedrock that is needed for innovation to move on. But is that all? Is that what we mean when we are talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat? Do we really think that that is what we were missing on? As KJ rightly said, that this is not something new. It has been there for ages. Only the disruption came when we got onto another policy framework. Let me come on to that little later. At this stage, let us see the conceptual framework that governs the idea of indigeneity of technology. And this is something that the economists, particularly those focusing on technology and development, have been focusing on. And at this point, we also have to appreciate that innovation and its dissemination is very much part of the institutional ecosystem within which it evolves. And that's what Schumpeter, right in 1939, pressed for in terms of realizing the general history, which plays an important role in analysis of development. This calls for a wider national preparedness for shaping the national transformation that we all are looking forward to with Atmanirbhar Bharat. And as KJ very rightly said, that this has been there. In fact, the nationalist spirit with the idea of self-reliance and Swadeshi was at the core when several of our leading lights engaged themselves with chosen trajectories that they worked on, whether it was C.V. Raman or Meghnad Saha, the theoretical physicist Satyendrath Bose, they all were very much part to the larger freedom struggle and the imbibing the values of getting onto that. In fact, Meghnad Saha, the famous astrophysicist, was very keen that we build a cyclotron for us. And this vision, what we started with, actually came through when we had Dr. Raja Ramanna, who actually provided the necessary support to it, got onto the challenge. And this was largely in terms of when we had acute shortage of foreign exchange. We had self-reliance as mantra, and the power supply was an issue at the lab, and they preferred to work throughout the nights to achieve that. And finally, they did. The success came through. Then you see a second wave of people where you find Satish Dhawan, Vikram Sarabhai, and many others. In fact, our own colleague, Professor Ashok Patsarthi, captured some of these details in his book, Technology to the Core, where the details, when we hear about Homi J. Bhabha or Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, those who worked in the first wave itself of the Atmanirbhar, that is where the lineage comes from. And this is what KJ meant when he said that this has been part of our own system. Within the tradition of economists, you find that the groups have been on two ends, the structuralists and the monetarists. And it is the structuralists who have been talking about it. Furtado, for instance, has been talking about the structural economy playing an important role in terms of how the technological progress emerges out of social and institutional changes that are happening. And Rolf Prebisk viewed this more in context of the idea of center periphery. But his idea was that at the center, there are few who are trying to allow the outflow of knowledge and development. And it is in this context that the idea of indigenization emerged and emerged in an important way to see how the process can be strengthened further. India's current efforts for self-reliance are in a way regaining that momentum of 60s, which got retarded during our economic reforms process, where the neoliberal approach in a way figured out more in terms of the theory of comparative advantage. If you're not good, leave it, let the imports be the source of material. And this is how in 30 years we ended up, not that it was not required, it was required, but as Lance Taylor very rightly says that when you get onto the track of economic reforms, what is more important is the sequencing of the economic reforms, how you prepare when you are opening up. And that is something which I think India would have to learn from. And as we are opening up for last several years or almost 3 decades, we need to see how we get onto the task of leveraging the strength of our scientific institutions for the market access that is required, market access of our own firms in our own markets. And for that, we require the consolidation and integration of our own market, GST has paved way for that. We need to see how within this we need to bring in the market access for our own firms with technological support from our own country. The COVID crisis has shown, and separately today we do not have time, I have separately written out on what role startups have played in the COVID crisis, how more than a dozen Indian startups have contributed to the supply, and ample evidences, ample literature now is coming out on that. The other factor that is of great significance is the idea of interlinkages. When we are talking of Atmanirbhar Bharat, this is not about autarkic situation. It is very much about the interlinkages. Interlinkages, not only in terms of laboratories and scientific establishments, but also about trade and investment. How we bring in governance on that front when we are talking about our firms and our markets and our technology. And that, I think, is the biggest question which we never faced since that. And this is not something that has not been addressed. In fact, if you look at Pavid's work right in 1987, Pavid raised the question of a very interesting question when he suggests that with the growth of industrial R&D departments in the 20th century, a large recruitment of university-trained scientists from some other country, be that in UK and the firms are from US like GE or DuPont, when they are working on, they are getting the Nobel Prize, but technology advantage is to that firm and to that country. And this is again very beautifully explained by Partho Dasgupta and Paul David when they talk about the idea of interesting insights. And these interesting insights are emanating from various dimensions of engagement, where Partho Dasgupta says that the essential difference between science and technology is that the former produces public and published knowledge, while the later produces private and often unpublished knowledge. And this is where Ashok Pathati's book of Technology at the Core comes quite handy in terms of how developing countries like India would have to pay attention to the governance part of the new technologies. Being a democratic society, we need to learn from the EU and others as to how the stakeholders are to be engaged in that process. So one is the very distinction, the fundamental question of distinguishing between science and technology, but also the idea how it fits in an interdependent world when we are looking at globalization. And that throws back on us what kind of globalization we need. And is it possible to have a sort of globalization where local actors have their own role to play and we are not completely bereft of local employment opportunities and local engagements? And this is where I think a new kind of narrative is required when science, technology, innovation policies are not disconnected with industrial policy. And these interlinkages should get further strengthened by the trade policy that we need and the kind of economic reforms that we need. And this is where global institutions at this point, particularly with collapse of Washington Consensus, haven't come up with a solution. I think the solution should come from developing countries. They would have to contribute in terms of the larger saga that we need to see. Washington Consensus was so narrowly focused on the interest of the US and the EU that it could not give technology or innovation capability, the space that the trade policy should have given, the trade space that WTO should have given, I think has largely been compromised. There may not be a sort of piecemeal solution. We would have to revisit and rethink as to how the localization process of development is strengthened without compromising the global interdependence and globalization. Globalization can no more be dominated by few actors, and few actors cannot monopolize technology flows. And this is, I think, largely the crux that we need to unbundle as we are unbundling the production chains and the architecture that is needed. Here, I think one important dimension that comes out from Chris Freeman is in terms of how we see the national and global regulations, particularly when it comes to new societies and their impact on of new technologies. What kind of regulation we need, how regulation should be evolved in partnership with stakeholders. But can we really have moratoriums like the one that is going on for GM crops? How do we deal with nanotechnology and nanoparticles? Can we really have dimensions that are of key significance when we are talking of issues that are of key significance? And that's where I think the sections that are important for societal engagement are very important. Let me now get into the third section of my talk, where I'm largely going to focus on capital goods and electrical vehicles in terms of the challenges we would have as we are moving on the idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. If we look at goods, India had come out with the national capital goods policy in 2016. It started significant challenges and gaps that exist in high-end, heavy-duty, high productivity, and high precision technologies. And that requires us to speed up the way we need to move forward with patents and intellectual property rights, particularly the focus on R&D. Electronics, as KJ is one of our national sort of lights on how electronic sector has emerged. The National Electronics Policy 2019 has built up on the 2000. We need to see the high cost of finance, the inadequate availability of quality power, inadequate infrastructure, the components and manufacturing parts and components that are needed to be structured, the design and intellectual property that we need. So the basics, when they are missing, it would be very difficult for us to go on for that takeoff which we are expecting. Even when we are thinking of engaging with the MSIS, the Modified Spatial Incentive Scheme that we were looking at in terms of providing a solution, the fact that the production of mobile handsets has gone up several times. We are seeing India emerging as a global center for production of mobile phones, and this is giving us a sort of a satisfactory feeling. But we need to see that there are many other components within the electronic sector that should come up for us to have an edge that is required. And that edge would come only when we are providing connections with the new sort of initiatives that are there. The production-linked incentive scheme that has been proposed, I think is important for us to see a scheme for promotion of manufacturing and electronics components and semiconductors, and also trying to identify the PLI scheme to see that it gives the necessary space for assembly, test, marketing, and packaging. And that would happen only when we are committed in terms of providing that space to our own firms and see that the units come up. Same applies to the innovations that are needed for electrical vehicles. Niti Aayog has come out with the detailed sort of roadmap in terms of how energy density or life cycle or safety related issues are to be addressed. But we need also to realize that there are certain, again, fundamental requirements that this industry requires, not only in terms of financing and battery or chemical related material that is needed. And that's where I'm saying that the trade policy cannot be bereft of the industrial policy. And the time has come then that we converge our endeavors of what Commerce Ministry is doing, what DST is doing, and what Finance Ministry is doing. And that convergence is extremely important as we are going ahead with some of these challenges that we are facing in specific sectors. As I'm getting into the fourth section, about the governance part of it, as KJ mentioned at the beginning, my idea is to have the AEI framework, the access, equity, and inclusion, access to technology, equity emanating out of absorption of technology, and a process which is not excluding too many people as we move forward with access and equity. And they work vice versa. The access determining equity and equity determining the nature of access that we want our technology to provide. At RIS, we have developed at length this framework, and there are separate commentaries. Today, I just want to highlight that the STI policy requires AEI framework for distributive justice that we are talking of. AEI is central to the debate on access and availability of vaccines, drugs, and devices in the context of COVID-19 crisis. Access to vaccines, particularly affordable vaccines, is a big issue with no easy solutions in sight. Whether the vaccines will be distributed first to the neediest and the countries where paying capacity is limited is a big issue. And we are all going to see how the inequalities would set in once the mega forces, and there are 28 actors now which are engaged in this process. We would see how the equitable distribution pans out as we move forward. The inclusivity aspect is crucial in wake of countries trying to negotiate and prioritize their needs, particularly over citizens of other countries. And that, I think, is important as we talk about the justification for access that can be derived from right to science. And that right to science is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we talk about. And that, I think, is not very different from what Arjun Sen Gupta used to talk about in terms of right to development. And that right to development or the right to science is something that brings in the question of equity and inclusion as we are going forward with our idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat. It manifests the right to development. And that's what I was saying when I was saying about localization process. And this localization process is important from the point of view of evolutionary economics and the time that we stop subscribing to the elements that are still evident of the Washington Consensus that actually bulldozed the idea of research and development at local level. With local priorities, and that, I think, is important as we move forward. Science and technology and innovation, they are directed towards social needs that can focus on addressing the inequities and ensure that the new policies do not create new inequities or exacerbate existing ones. In other words, there should be no new divides on account of STI. Friends, as I move towards closing, I would like to mention that on access, equity, and inclusion, AEI, RIS has developed an S&T index with 14 parameters. Today, there is no time to discuss that, but we have tried to use it in a couple of projects with DST, and we are very keen that this is adopted. So those of you who are interested, I would very much like you to see, and at RIS, we have also done state-level budgetary allocations compared around this index to see through principal component analysis how different states are figuring at our index, and that result is already out. We also need to see with the innovations that are coming forward, what kind of dimensions we can bring to Africa, and that, I think, is important as I close in terms of local capacities that are needed in terms of our engagement with sufficient global technological regimes, efforts that are required for dismantling barriers to technology access and transfer, be that in the realm of agriculture, health, water, energy, urbanization, and the sectors that are of key significance. Some of that are being addressed by G20 and the Science Technology Initiative of the G20 through S20. the initiatives that Germany launched at the G20 presidency, I think India would have to set the goal right in next 1 year or so as we prepare for 2022 India's presidency of G20. But next year itself, we have the BRICS presidency, where both Russia and China are going to be there as part of the process. And both are playing an extremely important role in terms of the thrust that is required. India's own emphasis on self-reliance can be a stimulus for endogenous development of technology, and it can help in terms of catching up the process of self-reliance that is needed, not only through the narrow vision of techno-nationalism, but also in terms of addressing the challenges that lie ahead in terms of ensuring this endogenous development. That is not just as a one-time response, but I think is a part of a consistent effort for several years to go on and see how we are realizing. In newspapers, you might have seen a lot of reaction in terms of the geostrategic issues coming up when we had issues coming out from China. And we think that blocking imports can solve the issue. No, we would have to see that what technology or innovation is required to reduce the cost of production, to make it available at the local level and be part of the competition. Closing borders is no solution. We need to see how competence level, ability to absorb competition as part of the globalized solution is the way forward. And that's what I think is something extremely and crucially dependent on technology. Indialics can do a far better and much more important and very constructive role in terms of creating this awareness. And I'm so glad that KJ and Professor Gill are pushing in not only students to undertake very innovative studies, and this is not something that we can just leave for DST or PSA office or our scientific establishment to take forward. The academic community should come forward to see where the handicaps are, what the limitations are, and how we are going to go forward. The time to lament the policy issues, I think, or criticizing policy issues, that is not the only way forward. Criticism, constructive criticism, engaging in what can be done better, in what way can be done better, I think is important. And that's where at RIS we have launched a think tank, University Connect. And that's what we are trying to emphasize as to how universities and think tanks can work together to see that the competence level that we want Indian industry to reflect can be absorbed. How we can help process experiences, global observations, theoretical insights, and practical way forward in terms of evolution, both in terms of quality, global acceptability, and competitiveness that is needed. Important is also to put our own house in order, particularly from in terms of governance, and that I think is something where, as I said in the beginning, stakeholder consultations are important, and somewhere we need to move forward in terms of anticipating what kind of challenges are. We came out with a book recently, and I must advertise this, on socioeconomic impact assessment that I did with my colleague, Dr. Ravi Srinivas and Dr. Amit Kumar. They contributed in terms of how socioeconomic frameworks for technology assessment come in. And I think Indialics would do a great service to the nation by contributing and strengthening our socioeconomic assessment of technologies, the technology assessment mechanisms. TIFAC was tasked with it, and we know what direction we need to go and how many miles we need to go further on our ability to go forward with technology assessments. And I think more and more academic discussions, seminars, discussions, meetings, papers are required for us to see how the innovative companies that are there, they can work together with startups and certain technologies that can provide solutions to some of our challenges. And I think that's what probably is extremely important as we are going forward with the larger challenges. With these words, KJ, I stop here, and we have now around 20-25 minutes to discuss. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sachin, for such a wonderful treat. I think the last 40 minutes, you have traversed a very large space in the sphere of STIs, endogeneity, and the role and the issues relating to access, equity, and innovation. I think at the heart of your argument, I must say, what I was thoroughly impressed by is this is high time for us to search for a new narrative of STI under globalization. And what should be, I mean, this is, of course, this is an issue that people have been concerned about for the last 10 to 15 years, at least, from the South. But then, with the onset of COVID, you have articulated fairly well, taking the trajectory from the structuralist to monetarist school and coming to our Indian scholars' contribution, and you reiterated the role of what is called self-reliance, not in a static sense, but in a dynamic sense of the term, wherein that doesn't mean autarky or closing the doors of to the world market. And all the more important, you have said, you have articulated, drawing from your own work in RIS, the access equity dimension, wherein I think, apart from raising the challenges in this specific case of the emerging sector like electronics and electricals, and all the more importantly, you have raised the question of the whole role of what is called the local knowledge. In fact, the South should be able to find a solution for the South and by the South, instead of waiting for the Washington, the experts from the rest of the world to come and educate us to what to do. And you unequivocally highlighted the role of networks like Indialics in terms of building the bricks such a way that we are able to articulate our destiny, and especially in this kind of time. And I think in a time when Indian government of India is looking for a new technology, science and technology policy, I'm sure the insight that you have offered and the issue that you have thrown up for discussion, I think it is as I rightly said, just like the topic, the way in which you have articulated the issues in a magnificent way. I congratulate you and I thank you very much for it. At the same time, I'm sure there will be a number of questions coming up. I would rather reserve, instead of I've already taken, because I know people must be waiting to raise questions. And with these words, I would like to open the floor for discussion. You are free to raise your hand and raise questions. Now the floor is open for discussion. Hello. Yeah. Lakwinder, the floor is open. Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The floor is open for discussion.
Can you invite Dinesh to speak?
Yeah, Dinesh. Oh, sorry. I think I would to begin with. I would like to invite Professor Dinesh Abrol to for his remarks and comments and questions. Dinesh, hello,
Yeah,
please.
my greetings to all my friends
Yes.
and to Sachin in particular for framing the issue in the manner that he thought, is fitness of, the position that he holds today as a chairman of RIS and the kind of linkages that he has with the current system of governance at the moment, and I appreciate that some of the critical points that he has brought out come from his close association with the experience that he has gained, as well as the knowledge that he has of how the thinking is going on in different parts of the government. I will do my job as far as is concerned, because I do not hold any such position. See, when we are trying to search for a narrative, what is it for? Is it for legitimization, or is it to really create a credible policy framework for science technology? See, we are trying to search for a credible framework for today self-reliance. It cannot be technocentric. In fact, one of the big basic lessons that we have to learn from the Indian freedom movement and the discourses that it created, that there was major institutional changes sought. And it tried to control monopolies, for example, private monopolies. It tried to create a public sector. These institutional changes, but I can go on to saying the way it created a space for even the traditional industries. And then the challenge came up, how does one upgrade them? And very Ashok Parsati, whom you have quoted quite a few times in this, wrote about those issues also in the Economic and Political Weekly, his paper on KVIC, the Khadi Village Industries Commission, I would like to remind, including people like Arjun Sen Gupta, whom you have quoted. They talked about what happened to the informal sector. But what we faced during the COVID period was precisely that since we had weakened all our public sector and the state instruments, as a result, and the structures that we have created, in fact, were responsible for the misery of the millions of people in this country. Institutional issues are so important, and to be really remaining centric on technologies is not going to be the way forward. Point number one, as far as this is concerned. Number two, see, if we are looking for even institutional changes, can we really create private monopolies of geo and hope that, whether it's in oil sector or in telecom sector, that actually there would be distributed justice? I'm sorry, I don't buy this particular narrative that our firms, what are our firms? See, as I suggested, that the way we drive this, determining what the role of the big business is. If you look at the contribution of the big business, which was given complete freedom during the last 30 years by the governments, which were not necessarily held by this particular current ruling dispensation, did not create manufacturing. In fact, competence as far as it's concerned. These very big firms, you look at the contribution of these particular firms to manufacturing, a complete failure as far as it's concerned. So if that particular failure, be electronics, my friend KJ and I have had lot of discussions on this during the very period when we collaborated, and even right, we still would collaborate as far as it's concerned. And I used to point out to him that electronics is failing precisely because the way we have gone about the globalization narrative that we picked up as far as it's concerned. To cut the story short, if we are not talking of proper institutional changes, we are not talking about which actors have to be actually strengthened. If big firms are to be strengthened, they'll eat up tomorrow's startups also. That's what happens in the rest of the world. And in fact, that's the crisis of the developed capitalist countries. That's the crisis of climate. And if we are wanting to reproduce those particular crises in a different way in our country, and they would be even more severe, we have already seen that happening in different parts of the country. And don't think we have overcome COVID. COVID is still with us. And I am really, in fact, wanting to point out that today's science, technology, innovation policy has to actually produce credible structures, institutions. In fact, even if we have to absorb new technologies, whether electric vehicles will come or mobiles don't solve. Digital technology does not solve problems of there is a tremendous divide. Apart from divide, digital learning is not learning. There is a different mechanism of learning altogether can be put in place. Are we having institutions for that? What is our new education policy doing? You look at that new education policy. I have written about it. I can share it with the friends as far as concerned. So the point is, in what way we are seeing the institutions, what we are seeing the structures. Structuralists were conscious about the fact that what structures we need to put in place. And I think that the discussion required on the structures and not on technology. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Brawl. Dinesh, it is a nice intervention. I thought you were essentially reinforcing the point that I would say Sachin was saying.
No. KJ, you don't need to paraphrase me. Paraphrase, I am directly talking to Sachin. Let me talk to him.
Okay.
Don't try to paraphrase. You play your role.
Okay. Fine. Okay. Now let me have okay, Dadaji. Fine. That's fine. Okay. Yeah. Because I thought I think very interesting point here. I would say that there is the need for STI to be not techno-centric. That's a very important point. And the need for credible structures and institutions, very important. And also, I must say one more thing, saying that from so-called science-based learning to experience-based learning, when Sachin talks about locally orchestrated or locally anchored development, you are actually raising something about that. Anyway, we'll come for discussion.
No, I'm not raising
Thank you
about
very
that.
much.
I'm writing very different thing. KJ.
You are saying
KJ, please don't interpret me. I will interpret.
I'm not interpreting. Okay. Now, let me just keep. Okay. Let me invite more questions now from the floor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say I'm sure Sachin will have something and to respond.
No, Joseph, there is Saradindu and there is Sujit Bhattacharya.
Yeah, they're all there. I'm Saradindu. Where are you? Hello.
Sujit is also there.
Sujit? Saradindu? Yeah. Vashna is there. Yeah, all are there. Yeah, right. Saradindu? Dr. Saradindu? Professor Sujit Bhattacharya? Hello.
I will come to it after some time.
After some time. You right. Let me then ask a question, which I think in the last STIP 2013, isn't it? Yeah, in 3. There's an interesting statement saying that innovation should not be construed in terms of R&D that is rather myopic, but rather when we are trying to address the problem from that is their sentence. Now it is my side. When you try to link innovation or STI to development, you have to have a much broader approach to a development. I think that is actually that point is actually a little more pointedly stated, I must say, by Sachin. Could you please elaborate on that? Because in that sense, today, when the country is looking forward to a new science, technology, innovation policy, I'm sure once that the draft is coming, we'll have a series of webinars wherein I invite Professor Dinesh Abrol to take the lead. We'll have a series of seminars. But for the time being, what would be Sachin's response to that? To what direction the new policy should be, what could be the new directions that the new policy could be taking as compared to the previous
one? Thank you. Thanks, KJ. Let me also bring in the very important point that Dr. Abral has raised, and I think there are no sort of easy responses to these sort of very substantive issue. I would say when it comes to policy choices that are being made vis-a-vis internationalization and local monopolies, and that I think we would have to see through at two different levels. The kind of, and that's why I was saying repeatedly, Professor Abral, about our ability and the new narrative that we require, it would have to combine the industrial trade and innovation policies in tandem with each other. If they are going poles apart, if we are trying to block through trade and we are failing to do so in terms of the nature of industrial policy that we need, that is what I am indicating at. That is what is required. We can't come out of one monopoly to end up with another. That's not the way forward. And the example that you gave is more about the service. It is not about innovation. We need to see geo. I do not know what innovation you can connect them with. So that is more a service oriented. I do buy your point, and as Dinesh, you know, both of us agree on the way forward for IDPL. In fact, if you might have noticed, I wrote in Economic Times during COVID period why IDPL is not being revived. So we share, in fact, the startups that have come up, and there is another paper that I wrote in terms of how those startups have drawn their strength from public sector enterprises, and that I think is important. So in public sector enterprises themselves not jumping in but providing inputs is extremely important. In fact, the National Virology Institute, Pune, has supported 7 startups that are doing wonders in terms of reducing the cost of some of the gadgets that are of key significance. So I think KJ was very right when he was trying to paraphrase you, but a paraphrase in the sense that what sentence he said was important in terms of the observation that you made, that self-reliance cannot be technocentric. It need not mean a shift to private monopoly. Of course, if we do not work in that direction, we would end up. But unfortunately or fortunately, the time that we have ended up with is the new globalization, and the narrative that would come out would not be led by economists, at least. And with the collapse of the Washington Consensus and financialization of the development process, we now know the public acceptability would not be there at all if we lose out on this. The technology and innovation may play an extremely important role in the new phase of globalization, in the globalization narrative per se. And that, I think, would be different from what we are seeing in terms of infrastructure building, in terms of providing debt for financing that infrastructure, or finding ways to pump in technologies for which you end up your life repaying that. So we need to see that a larger question in terms of the institutional connect, and also what can bring in the credible solution that is feasible. Coming to you, KJ, in terms of how this would be different, as I'm seeing in terms of the broad contents, possibly the emphasis on public sector playing the role that is needed, the public sector science institutions. There is no point in me sort of kite flying on that, but since some of us were involved in some sections of the report, as you know, there were some 10 groups, and there was one group on internationalization where RIS was represented. So So we discussed about the possible modalities of facilitating the internationalization process through MTAs and MRAs, etc., the material transfer agreements, the mutual recognition agreements, etc., in terms of R&D and bringing in investment from that perspective. So those are some of the details and a roadmap. I think that's where the new policy would be different than the previous more statement-oriented initiatives.
Thank you, Sachin. So now the floor is open. Yeah, please. Dr. Panda, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Joseph. It was wonderful to listen, Professor Chaturvedi. I've only, I think, one reflection and one question to ask Professor Chaturvedi. In fact, it's not a very question. In fact, just to know his insights on it. Let me ask with the question, and after that, I'll do some reflection on it. The question is actually, of course, the answer is very simply said, but to make it explicit, I just want to ask this question. Can we make, so we are now experiencing some kind of pandemic disruption. Can this pandemic disruption, I think, be converted to some kind of opportunity and be converted to some kind of humanitarian, creative destruction? And I mean, that's something which I feel it can, but then I would just like to know Professor Chaturvedi's response to it. That's number one. Number two, actually, I think when I was listening to Professor, Dinesh, I think he has made a very valid observation. See, most of the things actually, I think even Professor Chaturvedi also mentioned about the transaction cost, making India self-reliant. I think one of the important challenges that we find is in the form of high transaction cost. And when it comes to high transaction cost, always institutions are critical there itself. So there lies actually developing a robust institutional arrangement in our economy in the country. Right now, as it stands, many of these institutional arrangements are not efficient. And there are the reasons, for example, starting from property rights for the enforcement of contract, office of governance, law and order, rent seeking, I think connectivity. And so there are many which are not in that efficient, arrangement. There is a need to go for immediately some kind of efficiency improvement with respect to the institutions. For example, I'm in the Northeast. Much of the problems of underdevelopment, industrialization in the Northeast, it's not because of lack of funds. It's essentially because of the institutional arrangements. So that's what I feel actually in the country. We need to also Indonesian of technology. I think that's important. But in addition to that also, what's critical is also taking into account improving upon the efficiency level of the institutional arrangement that we have. That's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Sachin, could you please briefly respond to that by the time the next person?
Thank you, KJ. Thanks, Dr. Panda. I think I fully agree with you, and that's what I meant when I was saying that we require a sort of national preparedness for getting onto that task, and that is a huge challenge for us in terms of bridging the gap in terms of evolution and development of the technology and its dissemination. That process is if not bringing in startups and bringing in more diversity in the ecosystem, the traditional institutional frameworks are not going to deliver as fast as we need, and we need it rather fast. So to encourage that, multiple points of dissemination are needed, and that sort of change can happen only with the entry of young companies, young entrepreneurs, and also those who are able to bring in the strength that they have. Leveraging the new policy choices and options that are available, I think is going to be sort of way forward. rent seeking and others that you mentioned, Dr. Panda, I think is unfortunate reality. But to overcome that, probably the dependence on digitalization and finding some ways to reduce it. In some areas, we have succeeded, as I said, with the IT-based intervention, with the stakes that have come up. We have succeeded in some direction. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to see the way mega institutions could not make it. But definitely, I see small firms definitely getting through and probably breaking the ceiling that is needed.
Yeah, thank you.
Now,
Now
can I
we
ask?
have a few more questions. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, please.
This is Sujit.
Sujit,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Sachin, it was a wonderful lecture, really, and you have brought attention to many. It was interesting to see that you have brought the historical aspect of also, which is very much required. And rightly so, when you look back, Meghnad Saab, PC, Chandra, and all that, Prafulla Chandra. But there is another aspect of it. There was uh, a novel in 1916, Ghore Baile, by Rabindranath Tagore. And it is the English version of it also, The Home and the World. I was just searching the English version. And what it was trying to say in the debate on self-reliant, there are two characters, and he says that in the debate of self-reliant, you can also deny equity and access. So these were when you stretch that self-reliant too much, so it says that are you not stopping that equity and access? So that is the novel which actually goes back and forth, that where do you take that self-reliance? So herein I see that the question more coming into the academic framework is that on one hand we are talking of the self-reliant, but the other hand we don't have to, which I say that it is a thought where we do not disconnect ourselves from the larger global value chains or the global chains per se. So possibly thoughts on that, that how we are moving ahead now in the 21st century with this new self-reliant again, looking at the self-reliant in this 21st century context. That is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think, and I don't want to respond to that, but I think I'm not here to respond, but I'm passing the question to you. Very interesting question, in fact. Yeah.
Very interesting question. Thanks, Sujit. I think the whole issue is very much about this only: how you promote local enterprises, local context-specific technology to come up without ending up with the issues of exclusion, inequity, as Dinesh very rightly said about monopolization, or as Dr. Panda said, monopolistic rent seeking. So I think the path is not easy. We would have to see. Unfortunately, Sujit, what is happening is that we are not developing the frameworks that are needed, and that's where I said that entities like ours and our community would have to do the frameworks for technology assessment, for the equity and access related analytical frameworks, and applying and seeing them in a specific context where new developments are happening, be that at any of the ports. Compare the private port and a public port, the Jawaharlal Nehru port in Mumbai, or the Adani port that has come up in Orissa. Let us compare and see the cost of the new technologies that have been introduced for trade facilitation, the impact on environmental concerns, etc., etc. There might be hundreds of such examples that are feasible and possible for us to see whether new introductions are actually bringing in access and equity and inclusion. As I said, we have done of the states and their budget, where do they figure in STI when it comes to AEI index. But like that, I think we would have to constantly follow up and evolve. There is no one linear solution for this. Unfortunately, would have to keep on evolving our reference points and our sort of frameworks, because I do not think the dynamism that globalization or our interdependence on others and introduction of Atmanirbhar would bring in a static situation for us. It would bring in situation where not only reference points, but also the assessment frameworks would have to constantly evolve.
I'm very glad that topic you have chosen and spoken so well. And Indialics, in fact, bringing this platform, you are right that Indialics has to step in, which is stepping in and bringing this type of discussion and engaging discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sujit. Yeah, I think now we can have a few more questions. Already getting 5:25. Looks like. Yeah. Hello.
Can you
It
hear
should be
me?
5:29. Yeah. I think Lakunta, you have. I'm sure you won't be keeping quiet.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Please go ahead. Also, I'm very much
Oh,
sensitive. So
yes.
please go ahead. Yeah.
No, thank you. I was having
please.
some issue with my audio.
Okay.
Hope I'm audible now. And
much.
thank you very much,
Very much.
Professor Chaturvedi, for stimulating a very lively discussion on such an important thing. And I enjoyed all the questions also. And I think this will be, discussed in more detail in the times to come. I have one, maybe another angle to this question of self-reliance in its new avatar, which is about the involvement of the society. I mean, we heard a lot about enterprises, whether there should be public, private, or there should be big or small capital, and that's an interesting and important debate. But along with that, in the international scenario, we are now talking about a so-called quadruple helix model, if we can build a narrative around that, which is to also link, the local social or local societal actors into the making of technology. So my question to Sachin is, the governance structure that we are intending to build in the form of science, technology, innovation policy and the follow-up guidelines, are we keeping this decentralized, context-specific structure or ecosystems in mind? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Sachin, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadhendu. I think I fully agree with you. I'm not sure whether it is being built up in the current framework or not, but I'm all for it, and I think it is an important constituent of the point that I was trying to make in terms of localization. And that, I think, is absolutely essential if we give a due credence to it and try to do the cross learnings that are possible. And some of the Scandinavian countries have launched similar programs in terms of identifying the local priorities and factoring them in the structures that are coming in. So probably that, I think, is something which so far civil society organizations have tried on their own, but the foundations like the one that we see led by Professor Gupta is bringing in, but that is more at individual level or in some form linked with DST. But a full spectrum wide adoption of it, I think, would be extremely important, and that's what I say as localization of our development priorities. And this is what, Sardendu, I think is important for the kind of globalization that we need, where we give credence and priority to local expectations and local engagement.
Yeah, thank you. I think, shall we conclude? I must say that I think out of thanks, I'm sure formally Professor Lakwinder Singh will be giving. But I was actually, it's more like occurring to me a question like there is no reason. I mean, there is no reason to question the relevance or rather credibility of locally anchored development or society centric. But now the question is, when the Globalics network, when we talk about it, what emerges important is does it also mean strengthening the local competence building systems without appropriate institutional architecture to build capabilities of individuals and organizations at the local level? How far we can travel with respect to our the paradigm of locally anchored, self-reliant, and inclusive and socially oriented development, or that is something which how to build capabilities, because in Globalics we talk about learning, innovation, and competence building systems at different levels. That's what in fact I was thinking.
KJ,
perhaps. Yeah.
KJ, I have a suggestion to Sachin.
Yeah.
Can I make suggestion?
I mean, I was just trying to reflect further.
Sachin,
This is going to be the last question. That's it. Question, comment,
Sachin, I'm very concerned about the idea that government has picked up to privatize the public sector. In fact, if we are wanting to build transitions to whether new institutions or new technology, our public sector is a set of the people of the country, and the government needs to be, and we need to discuss with the government, and I hope through you, because you have very much access, I do not have. I can only protest on the street. And which I will do. Can we get the government to stop privatizing the public sector?
I think this is a very important question. I suspect whether this is the forum to discuss at length about it. I think I suggest that let us organize a session on that.
Yeah,
I think that is. I think Dinesh's concern is well taken, and I think we will have another session because other than taking the last question, I don't think that Sachin will be able to do justice to that. So I think I have a lot of sympathy with the question which Dinesh raised, but nonetheless, we will reserve that for a detailed deliberation with informed discussion. Otherwise, yeah. So can I request, it's already 5:35, already overshot by a little bit more time. May I request Lakwinder, but then just one announcement before asking Lakwinder to say the auto thanks. Our new policy is going to come, and we have a number of issues, and I would like a range of webinars, a number of speakers. We should line up a few and particularly I invite my younger colleagues to take lead in that. And I will not be doing this particular job anymore. I will not be doing that. And Lakwinder, of course, he will facilitate everything. Every day I will be participating, but then I would like to see more younger colleagues coming, taking the lead. Okay, I would like to have 3 other people. We are going to line it up. So let us and new STI policy should be discussed at length by Indialics colleagues, and we should give input for that. And otherwise, the network has no meaning. and we will not be doing our, I mean, this is exactly what Sachin also said earlier. We should organize at least 2-3 webinars on that. With this, and I would request Dinesh to open a first webinar, should be by Dinesh. And you should also ensure that there are a few youngsters along with you. Don't only
Sure,
get
sure.
haired people. We should not be the situation. I am very young, except
You
only.
still have black hair. Joseph, you join.
Yeah. Okay.
You join in discussing. You still have black hair.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Now I over to Professor Lakwinder Singhil for formal vote of thanks. Of course, I'm very thankful to all of you.
Thank you, Professor Joseph. Today, I think this is a wonderful treat to all the people who have been participating. The discussions happen to be enlightening, and I'm sure that all of us will be, after this lecture, going to be much wiser compared to when we have not listened to Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. So I think that this is very, very important issues which have been raised. A lot of food for thought has been given. I think that discussions can continue for hours and hours, but larger issues which has been reflected here. But one of the important issue that what we need to raise here is that when we look in terms of the development process and role of technology and its linkages with other sectors of the economy, I think that the institution issues have been raised very well, but the amount of resource backup, I think India has been suffering a lot on that. So I think this is a deficiency for a long period of time, that the government policy is relatively promoting the private sector, but private sector has not come forward to shoulder the responsibility which has been shouldered in East Asian countries, especially by the firms. So when we shift to the big business, this kind of responsibility, I think that the accountability of that is not been adhered in the Indian situation, but it is an East Asian experience. But I think that the whole kind of discussion, when I listen to Dinesh, is focusing on that, you'll find that we are perhaps in a socialist world. But I think that the kind of capitalist economy which we are in and we are expected to be, I think that limitations, we have to look into that when we have to start the kind of discussion which we have been making. I think that the most important aspect of this lecture is that Sachin Chaturvedi has agreed with us, and he has fulfilled the expectations of the Indialics audience. And I'm indeed grateful to him that not only he has given this lecture, but wholeheartedly supporting the initiative taken by the Indialics from time to time. So I hope that with this lecture, he will not consider that his responsibility is over, but he has to still give helping hand to Indialics, because Indialics can depend upon the kind of leading lights in the areas of both intellectual support as well as financial support. So I think that the webinar series has relatively reduced a financial role a little bit for a while, but long term this will not continue. So we have to connect, and as I think this very good initiative which he has talked about, that the institution as well as universities he would like to bring together. I think that is the kind of linkages Indialics is expected to build. And I think that is the initiative which you have been taking is very good, and Indialics should be involved in that. So with these words, I would like to thank especially Professor Sachin Chaturvedi for delivering enlightening talk, and especially raising a lot of questions and answered very nicely. And the chair, my friend Professor KJ Joseph, who is the president of GlobalX, he's always very good in terms of shouldering the responsibility But the web host, the seminar host, basically he is, because he has given us the platform to conduct this proceedings of the Indialics. So I am grateful to the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, which he is adding, as well as to Professor KJ Joseph for chairing this session. And I am grateful to all the participants who have raised questions, but more important that those have been still, listening to all of us. So I'm indeed grateful, and I think that next week we are also going to organize the next lecture of the series, lecture 2, where mainly the Danish Abrol is expected to deliver the lecture. So let us hope for the best, and thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Can I-
Sachin.
can
Thank
I-
you all, dear
Hey.
friends. Thank you very much.
Can I thank
Thank you,
the
Lakwinder.
organizer?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, can I thank the organizer and the host and the speaker for making it so interesting? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sadaf.
You should take the lead next time for another interesting thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sachin. Lakwinder, thank you very much. Dinesh ji, how are you?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Prajit.